Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. There's a few more people just to come, no doubt, but we'll fit them in, I'm sure. We've done a few of these gallery talks before. They're always very popular. Gives a chance for people to learn more about our exhibitions, and as some of you will know, we take these kind of exhibitions very seriously. Deep research, and this has probably been one of the most exceptional exhibitions that this gallery has ever put on. Because it's so unusual and rare to have the opportunity to have direct access to an archive, an artist's archive, photographer, artist's archive. And it was really when I first met Yorick and Helene that I realized that there was this amazing body of work and that we would be able to tell this extraordinary story of the life of Yorick Blumenfeld, almost from beginning to end, even in our relatively small space. We're not a museum, we are a commercial gallery, so fitting everything in is always a bit of a challenge, but I think we've managed to do a very good job. Of course, that would have been completely impossible without the total support of Yorick, Owen's son, in case you don't know, and Lou Crowd, who curated the exhibition with Amy Tibble from the gallery. So really, all the hard work was done by these three. I just sort of stood around and made nice noises and do what gallery owners do. And as a consequence, we managed to produce not only an amazing exhibition, but the publication that we put together to go with it, which also took a huge amount of time, energy, and investment, will go out to the bookstores. It's the new book on Blumenfeld, which will go out into the world, which is great. And it's going to be distributed widely from now, and it will be widely read, and it will take the exhibition around the world, which is what we always wanted to do. We've already started to have also conversations with institutions in this country, museums, for example, who we know well. Bath have shown an interest, Kendal in the Lake District, which is an extraordinary, wonderful museum if you're ever up in that part of the world, have shown interest in taking this show. So I really hope that when, sadly, this show comes to an end here in London, that won't be the end of it. We will keep it alive. We will take the show on the road if the Blumenfeld family agree. Of course, it's their property, so they need to, but I hope we will. And the reaction so far has been exceptional. We've had a lot of very good press coverage, and what I've liked particularly, hard work in here, particularly on Saturdays, is the kids have been coming. And a lot of them discovering Blumenfeld's work for the first time, not realizing so many people are familiar with the imagery, but not the photographer, not the artist. So being able to tell that story and stitch it all together has been wonderful. So very rewarding for us to be able to do that. So that's me finished. I'm going to hand over now to Yorick and Lou, who are going to have a chat about all aspects to do with the life of Owen Blumenfeld. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for questions. They won't go on too long, but even so, I'm sure it's going to be very, very engrossing. So over to you two. Thank you.
So Yorick, let's begin in the beginning, not right at the beginning, but what was it like in the house, in the Blumenfeld household, when you were young, when you were growing up? Can you give us a little bit of sense of what Owen was like? I mean, obviously he was hugely creative and sort of just an incredible mind, and there were lots of things going on. But for you, what did you sort of feel as sort of a young man, young boy around him?
I think I felt very young. I was the youngest of the three children,
Yeah.
and so I had a special role, usually in keeping people amused and making them laugh if I could, particularly my father, who had a very good sense of humor and enjoyed that. But it wasn't easy because he was, he had himself had a very difficult youth and really quite horrendous. And so I think sometimes in France, where really my first real memories occurred, he was known as Monsieur Latrosse, which means Mr. Atrocity. And
Right.
that was because of all the all the horror stories he would tell from World War One, and most fortunately I wasn't exposed to most of those. He told it very well in his autobiography, but it was really quite horrific being a hospital driver in World War One and carrying back, you know, just ambulances filled with bodies and half-living beings. That was really an incredible experience. And so I think his moods varied considerably in the early years. Sometimes it was, his life in Paris was very difficult. We didn't have that much to eat at times, and it wasn't easy. And I think my first memories of being with my father was going to a restaurant with him and having to read the menu and make up my mind, and I just couldn't do that, and he very quickly lose his patience with me and start saying, you know, it is impossible for somebody of my age, who was by that time 60, so not to know what he wanted to eat. And so, you know, he made a big scene of it, and I would probably end up crying. So that was, you know, part of life.
That was part of life. The earliest works that we've got in the show are obviously the collages, which is great because they haven't really been shown here before. They were shown, some of them in the Jeu de Paume, and obviously well, not obviously, but they are incredibly personal works, and there are so many sort of different references in them, which obviously were things that were on his mind, not just art, but, you know, other things in his life, and also a sense of humour, an incredible sense of words. And I mean, is that what you feel they reveal, or for you, do you feel there's much more behind that? I mean, they're so incredibly deep when you look at them.
They're extraordinarily varied. I mean, he has some collages which go back to the death of his brother at the age of 17 that had made a tremendous impact on him, and he tried to reflect that. There were others which were satirical, of seeing him in a cardinal's hat, and my mother as being a nun, because my mother, I think, was not a very nun-like, nor was my father very much like a Catholic bishop. But I think he enjoyed playing with things. And many of the collages were playthings, no more.
Yeah, right, okay. And so has your opinion, you know, you've always looked at them now over the years, and have you always had the same opinion in a way, or have you, as you've grown older, not that you're old, has your opinion sort of changed, or you've always kind of seen the same in them?
No, I think they've changed considerably. I mean, I don't have the same view, partly because of the critiques that have come in from different people and different experts on the work, and that has sort of, you know, altered my view of what he was trying to do. And I think that certainly the last collages and photomontages he did of Hitler were make a bigger impression on me today than they did when I was, you know, a young person.
I noticed a lot, I mean, one of the things, I mean, I love the collages, and I was so blown away when I first saw some of them, you know, just, I mean, I've always obviously loved the photographs, but then that added another sort of layer, or layers to him. And but one thing I really like about them is you see this beginning of this sort of, you know, this concentration on self-portraits, which, you know, I love the self-portraits of Irwin, and it's almost, he does a lot of sort of swapping, role-playing, gender bending, maybe that's a bit strong actually. But there's also the beginning where he sort of starts to obscure a little bit his face, and in the later self-portraits, which we'll get on to later, there is this sort of kind of masking off and duality, and, you know, and sort of covering up. where do you think that comes from? I mean, I've always thought he had an amazing face, but where do you think? Did you kind of notice any sort of reason why he would do that, or where do you think that really comes from? Because it really carries on right through his work that he does obscure his face.
Well, I think he didn't obscure it as much as play with it.
Play with
I
it.
mean,
Yes, that's the word.
he did his first self-portraits when he got his first camera, and
Yes.
those were the days before selfie.
Can we even remember that? Because of
Yes,
Yeah.
that did occur at one stage, and
Yeah.
so he liked the idea of being able to photograph himself. I think he was partly haunted his entire life from a very early stage when one of his aunts said that he had a terribly ugly nose, and that insult stayed with him his whole life, really. Never left him. And one can see, I don't know if you know this book Eye to Eye, which is his autobiography, and he's there on the cover, and it's a very a big exposition of his nose. And it's a wonderful double portrait, but
Yeah.
it's really in profile and in front. But it made a big impression on him, and I think this was his passion for self-portraits continued his whole life and increased as the years went on. I mean, throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, he was all the time photographing himself.
Yeah.
Sometimes in photo booths where he would take a whole strip of self-portraits.
There's a few naked ones as well, aren't there?
A few naked ones.
Yeah.
Not at
It's
all
got no problem with
inhibited.
that.
No, I had a demand the other day for this photograph of himself naked in the bed in front of our bedroom in Amsterdam when I was just 2 or 3 years old. I'm still being held by my mother in the bed, and this group in Spain wanted to know if I didn't have any better prints of this stuff.
Right, they want some Photoshop ones.
Yes, so they're still interested in those. But I think my father had a much deeper interest in his self-portraits, because particularly when he went to Holland and spent a lot of time at the Rembrandt Museum in Holland at the time, of the National Museum, and there were all these amazing and great self-portraits by Rembrandt. I mean, Rembrandt was probably the greatest painter of a self-portrait in history, and my father felt that this was a portrait that he had to live up to. He had to really match in photography what somehow Rembrandt had done in painting. And the last portrait of his life, which he did in over a 10-year period, showed him behind a red light in Amsterdam, because the red light was the prostitutes who used red lights to heighten their profession. And when I asked him why he was doing this in the strange red light, he said because he felt that he had spent the last years of his life, and much of it as a prostitute to advertising. And the advertisers, he was selling himself to the highest bidder in the advertising world.
We'll get onto that a bit later, but he, yeah. I mean, it's funny because there is this sort of chiaroscuro. I keep going on about it because I find it really phenomenal in his prints, the way he divides, and obviously, you know, we're all multifaceted. I mean, do you think he had a bit of a sort of feminine side?
I think we all have
all,
masculine and
yeah.
feminine sides, men and women alike, and I think he recognized that. And in some of the drawings that he did, he was very, not proud, but he recognizes that his wife was half man and half woman, and he was half man and half woman, and somehow they managed to procreate.
Very successful. Very successful. So sort of like pulling it back to your sort of geographical life. As a family, you moved around Europe. I mean, the show really focuses on more Amsterdam, then Paris, and then America. Did you like that? Did you find the change of city? Did you sort of embrace that? I mean, when you're young, you know, we're a lot more accepting, I suppose. But for you, did you like the contrast, or you didn't really notice it? I mean, did it impact the family, do you think?
Well, of course, it had a strong impact on all the members of the family. I mean, they differed in their reactions to it. When I came to France, from Holland, I'd only really heard Dutch and German, because my mother and father spoke German. And I went to Paris, and suddenly I had to speak French, but I didn't have a word of French really, and so I had to learn that and go to school. And that wasn't easy. And then later coming to America, it was a repetition. I had to learn English, and my brother and sister knew English quite well.
Yeah.
And so it went. So it wasn't an easy progression from one country to the next, and seeing what held the family together was the ability of all of us to speak all the languages that were spoken. My mother and father always spoke German to the end, and my mother and sister spoke a lot of Dutch together, and so it went. I mean, you know, when I managed to survive that.
Yeah. And when you got to America, you had American English.
Yes.
So, when you were still in Amsterdam and in the days of, the sort of earlier days of Erwin's career at the Fox Leather Company, and in the second location of the shop, the darkroom, the famous darkroom was found. Was it completely sort of shambolic, or was it a little bit working? I mean, how did you get it going? What was the sort of process of this?
I didn't get anything going. The shop so I went bankrupt when I was born. So
right. Not you personally, but Erwin. Then.
Yes, Erwin was very lucky in finding a back room in the shop that he had bought, and suddenly there was the front of the space was modern and elegant, and in the back there was a door that was shut, and he managed to open that, and there he found a dark room with all the equipment there, the enlarger and the trays and all of that. So he was very lucky to then gradually shift from selling
the
leather stuff into selling the women who were buying it to pose for his photographs. But that was all before my time, and all I can do is refer to.
I was hoping for a bit more insight, but I thought that you actually and Erwin's children were a little bit involved in the darkroom when he started printing later.
No, later I was in Paris. I started to be involved.
Started being involved.
Yes, but that was much later.
I'm doing you a real injustice actually now, about your age, aren't I? Because that would have been
I found working in the darkroom very unpleasant. I mean, it was dark, and there was either orange light on or a red light on, and then my father, who wanted just to sort of inspire me with what he was doing, he asked me to sort of shift the trays in which he put the prints in the developer, and the smell of the developers and everything made me frankly nauseous. And then I looked at things, and the image would suddenly appear from the paper, because it was white at the beginning, and there the image came out. And so that was quite interesting, but the process was quite amazed me, but it was so uncomfortable and unpleasant. There was no air conditioning or anything.
It must have absolutely stank in there.
Yes, it was very difficult.
Pretty dangerous almost. So the Amsterdam period is really where it begins, and he starts to do the portraits of the women coming into the shop, and sort of, you know, get more sort of familiar with that, and then from Amsterdam there was the move to Paris, and at the time in the 30s we know that it was kind of like the mecca for photography in a way. People were coming, they felt that there were possibilities. Of course there were people like Man Ray there, and Herbert Bayer, and some of the surrealists, and you know, it seemed from what I've read that there really were possibilities there if you were a photographer and you wanted to show your work and you wanted to do things. And it was a time where he moved a bit from the face more to the body. Did he ever talk about other photographers of that time that he met? Did he ever talk about that? Or?
Oh yes, he talked a lot about other photographers. I mean, it was, you know, a very social age, and he spent much time in the Dome where all the photographers would meet, and so he would hear stories and tell stories. But for example, with Kappa, he was quite involved because Kappa had gotten a commission from the French government to go, the first photographer to be allowed to go into one of the French fighter planes and fly and take pictures from the air. So, and poor Kappa didn't have the right camera, so he borrowed my father's camera.
Wow, this is an amazing story.
And he went up in the sky. He took all the pictures, and when he landed, he discovered there was no film in the camera.
Oh, how many times has this happened in photographic history? I mean, it's just like
so you know, that kind of experience made an
still a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you mentioned earlier, you know, you got to Paris. It wasn't easy. You know, everybody had to speak the language, and you know, money wasn't pouring out of everything. And he had his studio there in Rue de l'Ambre, and it's where he starts to take the portrait a bit further, and he photographs people like Menina, who's just here, can't quite reach, but she's become, well, you know this, she's become quite a favourite of mine. I love the pictures of Menina, and I think they get the full Blumenfeld, full Monty Blumenfeld sort of treatment.
But there were other models
yes.
too, like Lisa Fonseca, for example.
Yes, who's she?
Lisa
No,
Fonseca.
I'm joking. She was a very famous model.
She was a model that he photographed on the Eiffel Tower, which
yes.
was one of the most famous pictures, if not the most famous.
Yeah.
And when she was in her later years, I had lunch with her one day, and I asked her what it was like to be on the top level of the Eiffel Tower with no guarding rails or no guards or anything.
Yeah, which you wouldn't be allowed to do now.
No, of course you wouldn't be allowed, but and I said, what was the most frightening moment as you were holding onto the edge? She said, that wasn't the most frightening moment. It was when my father suddenly had dropped one of the lenses that was on his camera, and it went on the ground, and it started to roll off to the edge, and he started to go over it, over to it, and she thought, oh my God, he's going to go right over the edge.
I've killed him, oh my God.
And so she said, just let it go, and at the last minute, and that was her most frightening moment.
Oh my God, that is great. That is petrifying, absolutely petrifying. So he did talk about the people. He did talk about his sort of muses, and I mean, did he have sort of favourites of that time, of the Paris time? What I mean, Lisa Fonseca is pretty hard to beat, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, he had people whom he admired. He thought that much of the work of Man Ray was very, very inspiring, and you know, I think he was I think more influenced by Man Ray than he wished to admit.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, when you look at some of the prints actually in this room, especially over there, I mean, there's, you know, some incredible techniques going on, and sort of like, they both obviously had these certain tricks almost of photography, which I don't know who could replicate them now, but so this is also the time when he was in Paris, of course, which has now become a sort of legendary time because he met Cecil Beaton, which, you know, was, of course, caused a sort of, you know, I don't want to ricochet, a sort of domino effect almost of changes. Who came to his studio after he'd heard about his sort of more social portraits and had a visit, and then recommended Owen to Vogue, and they actually sort of took him up pretty much the same year, didn't they, more or less immediately. I mean, I love Cecil Beaton's work, and we've got a great portrait actually in the corridor that Owen did. And what did Owen think about him? Was he...
Somebody's holding up Cecil Beaton.
Oh, Peter! Fantastic.
That was a younger Cecil Beaton.
Did he like him? Was he happy to have him at the studio?
Yes, I think they became very good friends.
Yes.
I think, you know, it was a strange relationship. And I think I was very, I didn't really understand the relationship very well until recent years when I came across these letters from Cecil Beaton to my father in 1943. And my father then had escaped Europe and had gone to America and was working for Harper's Bazaar.
Yeah.
And Cecil Beaton had gone into the Middle East to take pictures of the war. And Cecil Beaton was absolutely, he was desperate. He thought it was a terrible state to be in, to take pictures of all these people being killed and horrible things happening. And he was congratulating my father for having escaped all these horrors. And but they stayed friends for life, really. And it was a. I don't think it was an intimate relationship, but it was a very close one.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. It's really interesting. Because, you know, I mean, probably, obviously, you know, I don't know, but I can imagine someone who's sort of so sort of creative and building their creativity as they move around Europe, and then they come to work with Paris Vogue, or French Vogue. Do you think Owen found that sort of difficult to work with those kind of people, or he was just sort of excited and were inspired by it? Because in a way it's a sort of instant sort of showcase for the fantastic work that he was doing. Was he glad? Do you think he was glad to work for Vogue?
Well, he started by working for Harper's Bazaar, and Harper's Bazaar.
Did he work for French Vogue a bit?
He worked for French Vogue, but that was very difficult, and he had great difficulties. And Aga didn't like him, and my father didn't like Aga,
right.
And so Aga had been sort of the cardinal of fashion in those days, and his voice was listened to by Vogue all around the world.
Right, so
this was hard. So he shifted his loyalties to Harper's Bazaar and worked under Brodovich for. But that was
3
a bit
years.
Later,
though, wasn't it?
Yes, that was that was 1941.
Yes.
And when he first came to America.
When he came to America.
And he didn't get along with Brodovich at all.
Oh right, well that doesn't really come across in what you read about it, because it's almost like they're two creatives that understood each other.
No, they understood each other as being European refugees from the war, and you know, my father thought he was a sort of exceptional artist, and Brodovich felt that he was sort of the one who had all the ideas and was a brilliant man, and so there was that clash really between them. So my father left after 3 years at
and when goes to American
Vogue.
But I don't want to talk about that yet.
Oh,
Oh my God, we'll come on to that in a minute.